our CISA Young Professional Sustainability Imbizo. My name is Nilam Parpu. I'm a structural engineer at YPImbizo, and I'm also the chairperson of the Gauteng South branch of the YPF. I'm just going to share my slide quickly. Okay, Godfrey, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
100%.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we are living in the most prosperous time in human history, but also the most unequal. And despite the abundance of wealth around the world, the vast majority of people are excluded from this prosperity, especially in South Africa. So as engineers, we should be concerned with the unequal and unjust distribution and access to basic services, such as water, sanitation, energy, transportation, as well as the inequalities that exist in our industry. As engineers, we are solution-oriented people, and we enjoy the opportunity to identify a product or need and design appropriate technical solutions for this. However, the structural and historical barriers to prosperity in South Africa require that we focus more broadly on improving the tools and practice critical to reducing inequality. And this includes social considerations, economics, policy, and even governance. So today's session is titled The Role of Engineering and Engineers in Reducing Inequality in South Africa. And we will unpack some of the inequalities that we face as an industry, and also look at ways that we can address them. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. And our keynote speaker for the session is Nwabisa Nontenja. She is an economist and associate researcher at the Center for Competition, Regulation, and Economic Development. She holds a Bachelor of Business Science degree from the University of Cape Town, as well as a Master of Commerce degree in economics from Wits University. Nwabisa's research interests encompass various topics relevant to South Africans' economic development, and they include labor economics, industrial policy, inequality, local government and service delivery, and migration. Nwabisa's previous research has investigated revenue management and its impact on the service delivery of rural district municipalities, methods to encourage advocacy and engagement of rural communities in municipal budget preparation process, and in municipal financial management, as well as the impact of self-selection and migrant characteristics on their labor market outcomes. Nwabisa's presentation is titled Inequality, Challenges and Solutions. So welcome, Nwabisa, and you can start sharing your presentation.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate this opportunity from CISA to come and speak to you about a very important topic that I think is important for us as South Africans, and you kind of see why as we go on in the presentation. Okay, so South Africa is known as and has been confirmed as the world's most unequal country. It has maintained its position as the world's most unequal country, both in terms of wealth and also in terms of income. And so we understand wealth to be a holding or the holdings of financial and physical assets. And then we understand income to be various flows of income over time. So a recent study by researchers from the World Inequality Lab at the Paris School of Economics and the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University found that the top 10% of South African wealth holders own more than 85% of household wealth. The top 1% of South Africa's wealth or population holds a share of 55%. The top 0.01%, which is about 3,500 individuals, own a share of wealth that is at 15% of total wealth. So their share of wealth is higher than the bottom 90%. That is found to hold around 14–15% of household wealth. And this level of wealth inequality has not decreased since the end of the apartheid regime and since democracy in 1994. And so not only has wealth inequality in South Africa not decreased, but the share of wealth captured by the top 1% and the top 0.1% may have increased during the period of democracy. And how South Africa actually compares with its neighbors or with comparable countries, we can see that compared to the other BRICS countries, including Russia, China, and India, also compared to the United States and the United Kingdom, the levels of inequality in South Africa are much higher than its peers. And as we can see from this particular graph, wealth inequality remained relatively stable and unchanged from 1994 until 2008. And of course, when the financial crisis hit and how it negatively affected the household wealth, particularly of the bottom 90% of the wealth distribution in this country. And we saw an actual increase in wealth inequality, and it's remained high since then. When we look at income inequality, that is the measure of inequality that is most relevant to wages and earnings and income. The top 1% of South African earners take home almost 20% of all income in the country. The top 10% take home 65% of all earnings in South Africa or in the country. So the bottom 90% has to make do with about 35% of all earnings in the country. The largest contributor to overall income inequality came from the labor market. So inequality in labor income is by far the largest contributor to aggregate income inequality. So we've seen that on average, income has increased, or the average earnings of workers within the South African economy have increased, particularly during the time between 1993 and 2014. However, right, this particular increase in wages has not translated into a decrease in income inequality. And this points to the fact that this increase in wages has largely been captured by earners in the top quintile or the top bracket of earners. So whatever growth that we've seen in the South African economy, whatever growth that we've seen in wages has not trickled down to the majority, but is largely concentrated amongst the country's top earners. The earnings divide that we see and the unequal growth in wages reflects the inherent structure of South Africa's economy that exhibits a skills bias. So we see that within the South African economy, the sectors that have seen an increase or a significant increase, for example, in the number of jobs, in the levels of wages, are those sectors that also exhibit a skills premium, or that require a certain levels of skills, high skills in particular. Now, this is a problem because the majority of South African, of the South African population does not possess the required skills to meaningfully participate in those particular sectors. So the tertiary sector, the services sector, sectors, for example, like financial services, for example, have seen a significant increase within their share or their contribution to South Africa's GDP and their share of jobs. But these are the sectors that are relatively exclusive and exclude the large majority of the country's people. Now, South Africa's inequality is gendered and racialized. So female workers within the labor market earn approximately 30% less on average than male workers. And then we also see the racialized nature of inequality in South Africa. Black Africans earn about data that observed mean real earnings between 2011 and 2015 showed that Black Africans earn about 6,900 Rand per month. Colored South Africans earn just over 9,000 Rand per month. Indian and Asian South Africans earn about 14,000, just over 14,000 Rand per month. And white South Africans earn significantly higher than that, just under 25,000 Rand per month. This is on average. And so we see that these patterns of earnings still reflect the patterns of privilege that were afforded under apartheid legislation. So we haven't really seen a significant structural change, even in how the economy rewards workers according to race. All right, so when we kind of think about why inequality matters, early thinkers in the field of economic development were of the view that, inequality does not really matter for economic growth and development. And this particular position was underpinned by the Kuznets hypothesis, which stated that high and rising inequality is inevitable in the early stages of economic development. And it is indeed an acceptable trade-off, especially if the incomes of the poor are rising and poverty is falling. So the main idea behind this is that wealth concentrations and concentrations of income when in the early stages of economic development and in the early stages of economic growth are useful because they are concentrated in the hands of entrepreneurs or capitalists that can then deploy those that level of wealth or those levels of earnings towards productive activities, like, for example, creating, investing in production, creating businesses, etc. And that over time, as these businesses grow, they will then absorb the majority of the population in the form of labor, and through that particular process, as the economy continues to grow, inequality will then fall. So concentration of wealth is important in the early stages of economic growth. However, empirical evidence that kind of investigated what the effect of economic growth was on inequality. Is it true that as economies grow from low levels of development to higher levels of development, do we see that U-shaped or that the Kuznets hypothesis of inequality, that at early stages of development, it tends to be very, very high, but as development continues, inequality falls? Well, the differences between countries regarding inequality are such that you can't draw generalizations. Factors such as history, the initial resource endowments of different countries, the levels of institutions or the kinds of institutions that exist within countries are important in determining that, not necessarily that this is an irrefutable law of economics. Now, studies that have actually investigated what the effect of inequality is on economic growth have actually gone on to show that high levels of inequality actually have a negative effect on economic development and economic growth. And high levels of inequality actually increase the lengths of recessions and low spells of growth and shorten the instances or the where we see economies actually in an economic peak or in a period of economic growth. All right, and so another region of the world that really did upend orthodox thinking around inequality, around the role of the state, for example, in development, around inequality and growth, have been the East Asian newly industrialized countries, right? China, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, etc. So these particular countries saw a large growth or large levels of growth post-World World War II that lifted millions of people out of poverty. An interesting fact about the growth of these East Asian newly industrialized countries was that it was accompanied by an egalitarian or equal income distribution. So high levels of economic growth were not, in fact, accompanied by high levels of inequality. So one of the key reasons why this was, researchers have investigated why it was that these countries experienced a largely inclusive and collective growth that included the majority of these countries' populations. And a key reason why that the researchers have pointed is that at the beginning of each of these countries' periods of industrialization, right, these periods were accompanied by large and extensive land reform processes that transformed feudal societies and that redistributed wealth to the poor. So land reform allowed for the emergence of a large land-owning and asset-holding middle class that was capable of making a successful transition to industrial entrepreneurs. So land reform, for example, in Japan and South Korea was actually supported by the occupying American presence, largely in an effort to prevent the spread of communism in the region, and also to quell rural dissent and to stave off the appeal of communism. But what was important was that this large asset transfer to a large rural population allowed them to meaningfully participate in a rapidly industrializing economy. That meant that whatever economic growth was seen in these particular countries actually benefited and included the majority. All right. And so one of the arguments about inequality is that, look, as long as individuals that occupy the bottom quintile of society in terms of income and wealth, as long as these individuals have or are relatively earn, for example, a relatively living wage or have access to some form of sustainable livelihood, then really inequality is not that big of a problem. That countries really should focus on economic growth, etc. However, inequality in itself, when there is a large gap between a small percentage of the population that is wealthy and the rest of the population, that particular circumstances brings with it problems, right, that are unique and that are linked to the presence of inequality. For example, when we think about the impact of inequality on economic growth, when you think about inequality, think about it as a state where the majority is excluded from meaningful economic participation. When you have the majority excluded, right, creditworthy borrowers, right, individuals that would have otherwise been creditworthy cannot borrow because they are too poor and do not have collateral. And so in that instance, it prevents a large majority of your population from, for example, borrowing in order to make investments in human capital, that is investments in education, or even investments in starting their own businesses, etc. And all of these, and for example, another phenomenon in highly unequal societies is that the poor are excluded, for example, from things like formal savings markets, formal insurance markets, and they have to rely on low interest savings club. Right now in South Africa, the poor, a large form of savings that they rely on is, for example, stokvels, which are a form of an informal low interest savings club that is worth billions of rands in estimated value, right? And so all of that money, right, is sitting in low interest forms, right? Because the majority of South Africa's poor, it's not that they are unwilling to save, right, but they are excluded. Economic inequality is a matter of economic exclusion. Another thing that we see is that Inequality also excludes people from holding assets. And the problem with inequality is that it is very path dependent. It is a phenomenon that once it exists in a particular society, it is self-reinforcing, and it repeats itself across generations. For example, there was a study that was conducted by Carter in 1999 that actually showed that if at the beginning of a particular country's industrialization or economic development, if that particular starting point was characterized by large inequalities, for example, in land ownership, in education holdings, etc., that particular inequality continues itself even after subsequent generations, right? It repeats itself over subsequent generations, making inequality very path dependent. All right, inequality, another problem with inequality is that it has a negative effect on opportunity. So one of the things that people also argue with regard to inequality is that, look, as long as people have equal opportunity, right, the outcome should not be of interest. However, inequality concentrates opportunities for socio-economic mobility within a wealthy few, right? And so poverty and wealth are therefore intergenerational. So what we see in South Africa is that 2/5 of all sons that are born to very poor fathers, so fathers that occupy the poorest quintile of the income distribution, these sons will themselves occupy the poorest 40% of their generation's income distribution. Similarly, sons of wealthy fathers will stand a 43% chance of also being in the wealthiest quintile. So inequality, because it concentrates economic opportunities for socio-economic mobility amongst a few, the large majority is excluded, and poverty and deprivation become intergenerational. Another problem that we see with inequality is that because it traps or it excludes the majority out of economic opportunity, this translates to various socioeconomic ills. For example, children from families with less income are more likely to experience the type of toxic stress that can hamper brain development and long-term academic health and economic outcomes. Again, a factor that makes inequality intergenerational. Another interesting and very important consequence of inequality is its effect on violent crime. Now, inequality fuels violent crime. And in fact, studies have shown that whether people feel safe walking home alone at night, that particular perception or the perception of safety is very strongly linked with whether or not a particular society exhibits large degrees of inequality. Inequality is also one of the strongest predictors of homicide rates. It is a stronger predictor of homicide rates than any other variable. One of the key reasons why we see this particular phenomenon is that because inequality actually, it excludes people from having a meaningful way of earning, attaining status, respect, personal advancement. So status, respect, and personal advancement are issues that are innate human needs. Every human being requires a sense of self, a sense of status, a sense of personal advancement. But the problem with high levels of inequality and wealth concentration is that the majority are excluded from formal ways of attaining that status or that personal advancement. And then violence is shown to be an alternative way that individuals actually pursue these things. And we see the gendered way in which this particular phenomenon kind of plays itself out. In the absence of being able to earn status, personal advancement, for example, from a job or from being a successful entrepreneur. And as individuals resort to violence, right, we see that the most vulnerable in society, women, children, bear the brunt of that particular violence. All right, so there are various policy responses that have been put forward to respond to inequality. The first one is fiscal redistribution, where progressive direct taxation underpins increased social spending by the government. So high inequality means that the gains of economic growth, right, are concentrated amongst a few. And we've seen that play itself out in South Africa, where we've seen where between 2003 and 2015, the top 5% of earners in South Africa saw their incomes increase by about 5.1% each year. However, the bottom 95% saw their incomes stagnate. Now, in this particular situation, it highlights the burden that is borne, for example, by government in filling that gap that is created by economic deprivation with social spending, with creating a large safety net. And in fact, studies by researcher Nora Lustig actually showed that South Africa's fiscal policy, which included significant social spending, had the largest redistributive effect compared, for example, to comparable countries like Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Indonesia, Mexico, and Peru, highlighting the important role that government spending has in filling the gap that economic exclusion has created. Another policy response has been to create a wealth tax within society or within South Africa. One of the reasons why a wealth tax has been put forward is that the data shows that South Africa has seen a stable and extreme wealth concentration. So a wealth tax may present a direct way of instituting some kind of progressive wealth distribution. For example, households that, for example, hold about 3.6 million rand worth of wealth, that's the top 1% of wealth holders in South Africa, that is about 354,000 individuals. And so this particular wealth tax would then apply in a progressive structure to these individuals that have a certain percentage of wealth holdings. Now, conservative estimates around a wealth tax say that it could raise an additional between 70 and 160 billion rand in additional revenue for South Africa. Other policy responses have been to increase the minimum wage, given the fact that earnings inequality and wage inequality is a very strong driver of income inequality in South Africa. Another policy response is to invest in education from early childhood through to higher education, given the fact that early childhood development and early childhood education has very long-term and very strong effects on continued academic success of children. One of the other policies that have been put forward in South Africa has been the broad-based Black economic empowerment policy. However, the success of BEE in creating a broad-based decrease in inequality has been limited because of the fact that its application has been rather narrow in South Africa's economy. All right, I think that's it from me. Apologies for going a bit over time, but yeah, I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Inequalities, for a really great presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think some really shocking statistics that you've shared regarding the inequality that we are experiencing in South Africa, and some really good insights into it. And also just looking at the associated economic and also social effects that come from it. I think it really highlights the need for us to target inequality. So thank you for that. So we will now be having a panel discussion regarding today's theme. And we have a panel that will share their insights and experience regarding today's theme of the role of engineers and engineering in reducing inequality in South Africa. So our first panelist is Shilpi Jain. Shilpi is a professional and chartered engineer. She has 10 years of experience as a civil engineer working in construction, consulting, and government. As a contractor, she was part of the core management team in construction of one of the first wind farms in South Africa and other projects. As a consultant, she has managed and designed a variety of projects from municipal services, sewer, water, stormwater, earthworks, roads, bulk water, to strategic and technical engineering investigations in South Africa, Greater Africa, and abroad. She has been a leader in South African engineering institutions and organizations functioning in strategic and operational roles. Shilpi also has a passion for infrastructure and community development, innovation, and strategic problem solving. She will be presenting on systematic inequalities in engineering from school to professional engineering.
All right, great. Thank you so much, all. And thanks, Neelam, for assisting. Great to be here. So I'm going to be talking about systematic inequalities in engineering from school to professional engineering level. So this presentation covers a lot of complex topics. So I'm going to talk just on a very high level about ideas and concepts, and more on a social and individual interventions level. Next slide, Neelam. So a lot of you have probably seen this. This is the STEM pipeline, which shows a student's trajectory from school to graduate level. And it's often called the Leaky Pipeline. And because for various reasons, at each step, you lose potential STEM graduates, with only 5% ending up as graduates in the end. What this diagram doesn't show us is what happens 2, 5, and 10 years down the line, and how many more engineers and STEM graduates we lose down the line. So this was a study done 10 years ago in the USA. Next slide, Mila. Thanks. So I'm going to talk about only 2 parts of the Leaky Pipeline, starting with schools and early education. As we all are well aware that South Africa has a historical disadvantage in the education sector. And as was just mentioned, the highest Gini index in the world, which indicates levels of inequality. There's a low percentage of children who have access to proper education. And the reason this is important is because studies have shown that early learning is key for a solid educational foundation down the line. So the next slide looks at what we can do. Thanks, Neelam. So we are not education professionals, and most of this has to do with government policy and resourcing and is out of our control. But what we can do is challenge leadership, be involved with decision makers and leaders, raise awareness on the issues, and maybe perform thought leadership through media and our peer groups. On a company level, we can sponsor, take part, and support initiatives such as the CISA Job Shadow Day and SAICI Bridge Building. These initiatives expose learners to the option of engineering and science careers, which they might not have thought was possible before. Having been involved in the program, I do know that this makes a difference to students. Companies can donate resources to schools, such as old computers and stationery. And on an individual level, you can do things such as create digital and social media content so that learners are exposed outside of school. What we're looking for is a cultural shift where engineering is interesting, where it's local, where it's relevant to people. You can start small. Just start in your community or start with your family even. Start with your nephew or niece, your neighbor. Show them, play a science game with them, show them a concept, show them a maths app. What you can do as an individual is also invest in education startups, as there's a lot of room for disruption in the sector. I'm not saying STEM is for everyone. We don't want to make 50 million engineers, but everyone can benefit from basic maths and science, as seen by the pandemic, where we've had to interpret graphs and statistics. Everyone is overworked and we don't have time, but if we work together, if 5 or 10 people start an initiative, we can split the work, do something every month, and we can build things that work. This is an exponential growth exercise. Every person who is impacted can change the lives of others. Next slide, Neelam. So now to working and training towards professional registration. Again, we're all familiar with these problems. High unemployment, exploited graduates, graduates with a lot of responsibility and not much support, graduates with a new way of thinking, digital minds and such, and a missing middle where young engineers do not get mentored by the retiring engineers and technical knowledge is not passed on. Next slide. So these graphs speak for themselves and paint a very stark picture. Looking at that red line, that shows 17,000 white male engineers compared to, on the next level, there's 28 female colored engineers and 143 female Indian engineers through the country. This is the EXA 2019 report. These are real stats. And they're quite shocking. If you look at approximately 2,000 African professionals compared to a population of about 40 million African citizens, that's just, surprising. And again, there's a huge disparity between male and female professionals, which is the first group of graphs, and the second group, which can barely see the female. Next slide, Neelam. So moving on to candidate engineers, you can see it's slightly starting to pick up. So it's not all doom and gloom, and a bit of change is happening. But we need to ask ourselves, is change happening fast enough? Is it enough change? Is change happening on management level? What about the female professionals who are still falling behind? So these are questions we need to ask ourselves and be more aware of our engineering community. Next slide, Neelam. So what can we do? Again, a lot of it has to do with government policy and resourcing. Entrepreneurs too can help chip away at unemployment. And we also want more public-private partnership to roll out projects, support, and retain YPs. On a company level, we're looking for a culture shift. We want businesses to see the positives of diversity, of which there are multiple positives of diversity, such as a population that, an industry that represents the population, designed for communities that has cultural connections to those communities and can include them. Diversity often leads to innovation. It's proven to lead to innovation and to harness the potential of the whole community, not just a select few as we're doing. So we need businesses to see that. We need businesses to break out of their comfort zone and put in programs to support engineers with diverse backgrounds. We as engineers can push our organizations to have structured training programs leading to professional engineering registration or professional registration. We can push our companies to build holistic engineers. Imagine if every organization put their energy behind this, we could have a more sustainable industry. Looking at those previous graphs, this is urgent, but I do know it's easier said than done. I've put there that we need to decolonize engineering, and I'm not trying to be an activist in this moment, but I'm just saying, let's look at it objectively. We need to move away from old methods based on profit, commerce, trade, and hierarchy to more community-based engineering, and one not based on the needs and views of the elite. We need to bring in traditional knowledge and engineering which supports diverse communities. When it comes to our graduate engineers and our companies, we shouldn't throw away informal training. It doesn't have to be huge, just small sessions that we have regularly, the informal training to support that. In terms of mentoring, that also doesn't have to be a huge commitment. Just a phone call every few months to a younger engineer can make a huge difference. And I'm speaking from experience. Again, for me, building a community, an engineering community and support has been really useful. Peers who I can call up for technical advice, maybe if there's a problem I'm faced with, or who I can depend on for support has been great. Mentors, having mentors on your phone who you can call up once in a while is also a good idea. And everyone's busy, so you will be the one who will probably be nurturing those relationships. And then my last slide, I just want to finish off with the engineering pipeline. Thanks, Neelam. Again, going back to it. So this is the engineering pipeline from the Council of Built Environment strategy, one of their strategy reports. The actual full reports gives initiatives and interventions put forward by the various organizations, but I'll just briefly talk through, I can send that link later, but I'll briefly talk through this. So the push strategy pushes graduates into the built environment professions from secondary and tertiary education levels. The intermediate strategy is aimed at providing assistance to new graduates, ensuring their ongoing development into fully registered professionals. And then the pull strategy deals primarily with making it attractive for professionals to remain in the built environment while still attracting new entrants. It is a retention strategy aimed at alleviating the loss of built environment skills. And I'm going to end there. I think I went a bit over time too, and thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Shilpi, for your presentation. And, thanks for explaining the situation that we are in our industry. I think from the stats that you shared, it's clear that we have a very long way to go. And I think you raised an important question, which is change happening fast enough? And I think it will require a major culture shift. So thank you for that. Our next panelist is, just give me 1 second. Yolan Pillay. Yolan is a function manager at SMEC South Africa for planning and traffic engineering in the KZN region. He holds a Bachelor of Science Civil Engineering degree and is a professional engineer with the Engineering Council of South Africa. He has over 14 years of experience in the transportation field. His experience extends from transport planning, traffic engineering, project management, design and implementation of a variety of transport-related projects in both the private and public sectors. Yolan specializes in traffic engineering and transportation planning with a strong focus on strategic transport projects. His passion in the engineering industry has seen him actively involved in the development initiatives for young professionals, which includes workshops, social activities, community projects, and partnerships with Engineers Without Borders. Yolan was also the CISA Young Engineer of the Year in 2020, and his presentation will address inequality towards being an expert, manager, or owner in our industry. So welcome, Yolan, and you can start sharing your presentation.
Just let me know once you can see.
Yes, we can see. Thanks.
Thank you, Neelam. Thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, colleagues, young engineers, graduates, future engineering specialists, future business owners or CEOs. I have a short presentation today in terms of looking at inequality towards being an expert, manager, a business owner, or CEO, which will help us set the scene in terms of the session that we have after our presentation. So going into the presentation, I'm going to be looking at defining what is an expert, what's a manager, what's a business owner, etc. I will then touch into what is your goal as an individual and how do we become an expert, looking at some of the possible challenges and solutions, or how do we become a manager, business owner, or CEO, and similarly looking at some of the possible challenges and solutions. And then we look at how we're going to close that gap in terms of inequality and just a share of my 7-point plan in terms of reaching your goal that you need to. So looking in terms of the different areas that we want to, as we indicated, either an expert, which is a specialist sometimes regarded as, or a manager within an organization, or even being a business owner or CEO. So we would normally look at an expert as a person who is very knowledgeable about a particular area. A manager is a person responsible for controlling or administrating an organization or unit within a larger corporate. And then we look at a business owner or CEO. The title of a CEO is typically given to someone by the board of directors. An owner is a job title is earned by a sole proprietorship or entrepreneurs who have total ownership of the business. And generally with a business owner or CEO, the individual will have strong communication skills, will have the ability to build strong relationships, will have a realistic optimism about the industry and the markets, a strong understanding about the industry, the people, strong listening skills, willingness to take calculated risk for the benefit of the business, ability to learn from the past mistakes or positives and take the organization forward, and about reading people and adapting to the necessary management styles. So those are some of the different the context in terms of what we define. So you need to define what is your potential in terms of the future. So do you want to become a specialist or expert, or do you see yourself going down the management in terms of unit management, or even being a business owner, CEO of an organization? So those are some of the career plans you need to have in mind before you embark, or as soon as you get out of university. So you need to keep asking yourselves, where do you see yourself in the next 5, 10, or 15 years? Because if you do not have a long-term goal, it'd be very difficult to develop your career in the area that you want. So you have to have an appropriate development plan that is measured on a regular basis. And you need to ensure that you are adhering to your plan, tailor-make your plan that is fit for purpose and that you can move towards your long-term goal in terms of your career. So looking at an expert or a specialist. So some of the challenges that are, so a lot of these information that's on my slides is based on my experience within the industry and also relating to some of my colleagues within my organization or in the industry itself. So looking at some of the challenges that we see graduates or young engineers face. So they don't fully understand the different disciplines that exist. So for example, the building structures, clean rooms, geotechnical engineering, geometric design. Candidates are generally not, they're not certain in which areas they would like to specialize. Sometimes candidates do not have the opportunity, they're not provided the opportunity to work on complex projects where they're able to then develop their skills within the specific areas. There's also limitations for young graduates in terms of broadening their skills through further studies, and that could be their honors degree, masters, or PhDs, or whatever degree they or further studies they would require to improve their expert knowledge. We often find that in some organizations there's favoritism, so one individual will be favored, leaving behind the others in terms of progressing within their careers. And then we also see there's a massive brain drain with some of our senior specialists, senior engineers, which makes it much more difficult for young engineers to have that supervisor role within their organization, within their team, to help them develop efficiently. So looking at some of the solutions in terms of how we can make sure that we, if the expert or specialist route is what we want to be follow, these are some of the solutions that we can. So first of all, and as Shilpi mentioned in the previous presentation, you need to find a mentor. And what I found is that you need to have an external mentor outside your organization that can look at in terms of holistically where your career is going, how you're progressing, as well as having an internal mentor within your organization to help you in terms of that career development. You can have more than one mentor. One, it can be a technical mentor, a business mentor, life skills mentor. So it's up to you in terms of identifying a mentor, approaching that individual and requesting them to be a mentor. There's a lot of mentors out there that's willing to teach. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. You need to also ensure that you need to self-study, keep up to breast in terms of technology, read journal articles. There's a lot of free webinars that's now available. So try and keep up in terms of technology so that you're well informed in terms of within the specialist area that you want to pursue. It's also quite important that you get involved in some of these technical bodies that we are part of. So you got, for example, the South African Institute of Civil Engineers, South African Institute of Chemical Engineers, or Electrical Engineers. So there's a lot of technical divisions within these associations. For example, I'm a transport engineer. I'm part of the transport division of SAICI. So you need to keep up to breast in terms of some of these developments. You need to also understand that if you want to become a specialist, apart from your undergraduate, you need to do further studies, either a master's, PhD, or any other coursework that will help you improve your technical. So understanding what are the different technikon universities or research institutes available, understanding which one will best suit your career and your specialist area. You also need to discuss your development plan with your mentor. Make sure that your mentor and yourself sign a mentorship agreement plan that is accepted by the seniors within the organization, to make sure that you are developing in a particular area and you're not stagnating. We also, apart from just having the qualifications or credentials in terms of a particular area, you need to also get your hands dirty, work on projects. So you need to progress from working on simple projects to complex projects. And through your company mentorship program, or between yourself and your mentor, you need to identify how you progress from a simple to a complex projects. And where possible, the companies can make you part of those project teams. Also remember that professional registration is key. So if you're going to be an expert, you're a technical engineer, people will not take you seriously if you do not have a professional registration. So apart from just becoming a specialist, make sure that you are professionally registered. Also, you need to network. You need to network across the industry with like-minded specialists within your region, your country, and also making contact with other specialists across the country, overseas. And this can easily now be done with some of the, for example, LinkedIn. You can connect with people, you can connect to certain associations or organizations, and you can learn what they are actually doing within a specific area. So looking at the next one, which is either a manager, a business owner, or CEO. So if this is a path that you would want to take, just in terms of some of the challenges that I understand that faces some of the young engineers. So the minority often compete with larger firms. So if you're a small business owner, you are competing with more established businesses, unless you are part of an enterprise development program. What we also find is that youngsters also have limited knowledge about the industry. And this could be procurement, tendering, the different services, markets, or clients, and also about business operations. So as an engineer, we don't study business management. So these are some of the challenges that young engineers face if they want to go down the business or management route. They also have limited relationship with key players in the industry. As I mentioned, you need to network as well. You also have limited training and development, which makes your development over the first few years of your career quite a slow growth or development, which also means that you're not ready to become a business owner or CEO or manager. So that is something that you need to take into account during your mentorship sessions as well. Some of the candidates or young engineers that want to become business owners or managers, they also lack some of those mentorship. As I mentioned, that you need to have your mentor. And if you aspire to be a business owner or manager, then try and find yourself a manager. If you don't know who to approach, there's a CISA network, there's a YPF, there's a SIC, there's various platforms. You can get involved, network, meet people in terms of, and understand what are those avenues in terms of you finding a mentor. Unfortunately, some organizations, they have very strict minimum requirements in terms of if you want to become a manager, they expect you to have at least 10 years of technical experience. You need to have some level of exposure to clients or whatever that may be. So these are some of the hinders that prevents people from moving up the ladder. But these are ideas that we need to build on and improve our ability to in some of these areas. Many companies support the development of EMEs and QSCs. So sometimes some companies have opportunities, whereas other companies do not have opportunities because they're not part of a bigger program within an organization. And then the last point is we have limited formal development program for business owners, CEOs at the industry level. So in terms of some of the solutions, both public and private sector have created platforms for established businesses to partner with for younger businesses to partner with established businesses so that you can grow your business under somebody else's watch. While developing your technical skills, you also need to improve your business knowledge about business management, financial management, procurement, legal aspects, quite important in terms of people management. So these are all some of the aspects that are required for you to become a business owner, a manager, CEO. Various companies or institutes have development programs to create effective managers. And as I mentioned, some of the criteria would look at leadership or management development programs. We've got the CISA School of Business. And then also getting involved in the industry bodies, networking. It's quite important. If a client wants to appoint a company for a particular job, that client will first probably approach someone that they can trust, that they have confidence that they can deliver. So building your own profile through networking, through your skills development, all of these are building blocks for you to become manager or CEO or business owner itself. So those are some of the pros and cons or solutions in terms of a specialist and a business owner itself. Then our previous two speakers talked about the inequality, whether it's age, gender, race. There's various inequalities that exist. However, government, the private sector have put various programs in place to improve. So we've got employment equity guidelines, we have employment equity targets that companies are trying to make. Government, from their perspective, are looking at including CPG components within projects. Some of the private clients are also including CPG component so that we enable some of the young firms previously from previously disadvantaged backgrounds, so that there's opportunities that lie there. It's about us becoming more aware of some of these opportunities. So in terms of closing that gaps, as I mentioned, there's a lot of work has been done, a lot of progress has been done, but as Shilpi shown in her presentation, we still have a long way to go. On a positive note, I can tell you from my perspective, I've attended a government school, both primary school, high school. I went to universities. So I've still managed to not have some of the kind of preferences, but through mentorship right from a schooling age, through university, and also being quite active and involved in industry, it allows you to grow yourself, understand what are some of those areas that you need to improve. It looks at it helps you identify the blind spots that you can't see to help you then progress within your organization or even outside your organization to become that business owner or CEO itself. In terms of, from my perspective, I believe in terms of recommendations, you need to find your long-term goal. Do you want to become a specialist? Do you want to become a manager, or do you want to become a business owner? It's only then that you can plan your development according to that. You need to, as I mentioned, having mentors is very important, both internal, external to the organization, but also finding some other type of mentors. As I mentioned, you can have a business mentor. It doesn't stop you from having more than one or two mentors. You need to self-teach. You need to tell yourself that I can only succeed if I know my technical aspects thoroughly. Even if you're a business owner in the industry, you need to have a broad understanding of the industry, the different disciplines within that you want to operate in. You need to get actively involved in some of these industry bodies such as SAICI, SAI, WISA, MISA, CISA. There's a lot that you can learn, and that'll help fast track your development, whether it's technical or business aspects. Networking is very important. You know, if you don't know anyone in the industry, you don't know the clients. Clients will only give, as I mentioned, clients will only give a project to, generally they would favor someone that they trust, they believe that can deliver on them. So networking, building your profile, it's not a one-day activity where you can build that. It takes quite a number of years in terms of building that. You also need to invest in yourself. I mean, apart from companies sending you on training or you're attending free webinars, sometimes, you know, we have to save up money from ourselves, attend a course. If you want to do a PMP course that costs 30,000 Rand, sometimes if you can't get that training within your organization, you know, you need to save up and invest in yourself as well. The same that you'll invest in your own home, you also need to invest in yourself, your career, and your future. And then Also, you need to work hard, be dedicated, and you shall succeed. I mean, I've come up as personally, it was quite hard to get where we are today, but it took a lot of late nights, it took a lot of weekend, it took a lot of our personal time in getting into the industry and building our own profiles. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Neelam.
Thank you, Yolan, for your insights and sharing your experience. I think some really great advice that you shared, especially for us as young engineers, including, identifying both internal and external mentors, self-studying and getting involved in technical bodies, also emphasizing that you need to invest in your own future and it's not just the responsibility of your employer. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Neelam. Okay,
I'm going to introduce our next. Okay, please stop sharing, Yolan. Thank you. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Okay, our next speaker is Chiriletso Mochidisi Ramutla. She has 14 years of experience in the design and construction, project management of various community and township development projects, high voltage power lines and substations, dam, water and civil engineering works, and the maintenance of infrastructure. At present, she's employed at the Dr. J.C. Maroka local municipality as the manager of the project management unit. And in her role, she oversees the capital infrastructure program and project management functions within the unit to strategically eradicate poverty and create conditions for local economic development, whilst also encouraging sustainable stakeholder integration, collaboration, support, and monitoring. Her presentation will look at the current legislation and how we can get engineers to serve society better. So welcome, Chiriletso, and you can share your presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just navigating here to share my screen. Give me a second. Okay, can you see my screen?
We can, yes. You can just put it in presentation mode.
Just shifting. Perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the welcome, Nina. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank Consulting Engineers South Africa and the Young Professionals Forum to invite me to speak on this platform. It is my first love when I started in engineering 14 years back, and I'm excited to be here. My subtopic on today's discussion will be, with the current legislation, how can we get engineers to serve society? Just as a brief introduction, the growth of inequality has become a global challenge in rich and poor communities, as our first speaker detailed with numbers, the challenges that we are going through. In developing countries, inequality is closely mirrored to high-speed urbanization and industrialization. Here at home, urban poverty is increasing with a high speed, and poorer communities are disadvantaged because of lack of basic services. South Africa's state of inequality is a long one, and it's also one that dates back to the colonial apartheid period. Unfortunately, eras of history are haunting us, and the legislations that were legislated at the time are still engraved in our current society. These legislations are the Land Act of 1913, the Urban Areas Act of 1923, the Global Areas Act of 1950. And collectively, these inheritances have resulted in segregation of race groups, the separation of rural homelands for Africans, cheap migrant labor systems for urban-based economic development policies, delineated geography and natural resources. The rich and also more sustainable urban suburbs that are well serviced, while the poor lived in marginalized areas that receive a mandate of minimum level of basic services. Post to our historical disadvantages, economic policy has encouraged polarization of South Africa's historical legacies with central equity objectives and economic plans, namely the Reconstruction and Development Program, the Growth and Employment Redistribution. These strategies, however, they were meant to be good, but they also on the upside, they've increased there was an increase in gross domestic product growth and unemployment and inequality at the same time. The Municipal Systems Act of 2000 reinforces these in local government by prioritizing service delivery in municipalities with highest economic potential. This was obviously done to get to the objective of stimulating economic activities faster where the potential is the best. The Act, however, also mandates urban planners to provide only the minimum levels of basic services to poorer communities. So the minimum basic levels of poorer communities are nowhere close to what is provisioned for in urban areas. As districts develop their spatial development frameworks and IDPs, wealthier provinces have more resources than rural poorer provinces. Because of this mandate of the Municipal Systems Act. And over time in our new democracy, a third category of service delivery has been established, namely the intermediate service delivery level. These are established in provinces that contain both rural and urban municipalities. Despite the apparent inequality problem that we have across the globe, we have achieved some goodness even with our historical apartheid history. Our achievements are that we have urban authorities are now increasingly being held accountable for their inability to provide services to poorer communities. We have also good service delivery in richer and more industrialized provinces. But the question arises, why is this? Is service delivery a function of wealth? Does legislation empower the engineering fraternity to serve this, for us to serve society? And our first speaker alluded to the first two questions, so I will not be going in depth to that. This is just a kind reminder to say investment in infrastructure is a long-term requirement for growth and a long-term factor that will make growth sustainable, by Chandra Kar. From our current legislation and our history, there are challenges that we are facing as engineers that speak to inequality. These are that because of legislation, the urban planners in poorer districts are confronted with high levels of poverty. There's poor infrastructure and residents are not able to pay for services that are being provided by our government. More recently, the cadre deployment system of the newly led ANC government has resulted in high levels of nepotism, corruption, and poor management skills in municipalities. This has further compromised the efforts of delivering basic level of services in poorer communities at a high quality level. In addition, the Municipal System Act has instructed planners to prioritize the development of first order infrastructure and service delivery in municipalities with high economic potential, confronting urban planners in South Africa with a contradictory mandate to stimulate simultaneously pursue both monetist and pro-poor objectives. There is a major rural-urban influx. A lot of people from the rural areas are now running away from poverty to seek opportunities to be able to sustain themselves. And this is forcing richer municipalities to provide land and services for large numbers of newly arrived poorer residents. These residents also cannot afford services. Poor infrastructure, moreover, precludes the development of technology such as waterborne sanitation in rural areas. After more than 25 years of democracy, we are still having municipalities implement non-waterborne sanitation infrastructure in our municipality, in our rural areas. We have sanitation services that are not working, that are not actually integrated into wastewater treatment plants. There's a lot of challenges that we are facing in that space. Local authorities are also confronted with different types of problems that are integrated. They have political pressure, there's an inefficiency problem, and limited resources. So you can just imagine where you have limited resources and inefficiency combined, and then there's this political pressure that comes. Municipalities that are also controlled by opposition parties, which is the non-ANC parties, often find it problematic to obtain assistance from national government. They are not prioritized. There is inequality in them receiving services from them. Violent service delivery protests divert resource allocations. This further limits resources to focus on service delivery. The unequal delivery of basic services is constrained by limited resources and poverty. Unequal access is compromised by inefficiency, corruption, and poor management. Robert Trout also reminds us that a successful society is characterized by a rising living standard for its population, increasing investment in factories and basic infrastructure, and the generation of additional surpluses, which is invested in generating new discoveries in science and technologies. So what have we found? What have I found in all this that I have read in preparation of today? What we have found is that high levels of poverty exists, and this is a sad reality, as our first speaker has clearly indicated in the numbers. And households cannot pay for services. And every year, our government is telling us that they have met their plans, the service delivery plans and mandates they have spent. But how do they recover those costs? How are they building ways to be sustainable? Poorer rural areas remain rural with the poorest levels of service delivery and low levels of inequality because of less varied economic activities and having a smaller share percentage of wealth. So our rural communities are slowly and fast going nowhere because without economic stimulation, people do not have jobs or opportunities to contribute to the economic wealth. Service delivery levels in richer urban areas is higher. Wealth inequality is low in affluent, well-established areas, as well as in marginalized rural ones. However, when comparing rural areas to urban areas, inequality is higher in rural areas in terms of service delivery compared to urban areas. While in rural urban areas, these are the urban areas that fall under the third level of service delivery, there is an aggregated intermediate service delivery level. So they are on average, they're neither low or high. They have inequality levels that are low in rural municipalities and higher levels in urban ones that provide for different levels of service delivery. So, and then the districts with the intermediate levels of service delivery reflect the highest levels of service delivery inequality. So although the poorer communities don't suffer from inequality as much, all of them are sort of common, and the higher or richer urban communities also don't suffer between themselves. The ones that are actually in between have the highest levels of inequality. Wealth inequality is highest in these areas that are in industrialization transition phase, especially if areas both include urban and rural municipalities. We see a lot of these in Limpopo and Mpumalanga. The proposed recommendations to bridge this gap, current legislation for infrastructure development, specifically your Systems Act, Municipal Systems Act, is to be reviewed to empower infrastructure development planning to strategically reduce inequality by accommodating poorer residents in the development of modern industrial cities. This will surely address the rural-urban influx and the gap between the more economical sustainable areas will be able to share their wealth that the poorer communities don't have, to bridge the gap for us to actually work towards a better South Africa for all. The next recommendation is to improve the legislated minimum levels of basic services to poorer communities. The only way that government can actually provide a better quality of basic level of services is for it to be legislated. And the current legislation is failing dismally when you compare it to the target of the development plans we want to reach and what is being implemented on the ground. This improvement will allow for the transfer of technology to technology that supports modern industrialization to rural, urban, and rural districts. And this will further address rural migration to urban areas. The migration to urban areas is stimulated by poverty because people are looking for better opportunities. This improvement will also stimulate varied economic activities, slowing down migration and also increasing job and work opportunities in local rural areas. It will also stimulate wealth creations in the same areas. Currently, our legislation enforces socio-economic status. Legislation is to reinforce the forces of segregation rather than the socio-economic status. Current resources and all fears of government, especially we're talking about now manpower and officials, all these in all fears of the built environment industry, including government, is to be capacitated to industry level requirements. As our previous speaker has shared nuggets, golden nuggets on how to even position yourself in these difficult times to achieve the implementation of quality service delivery levels. Strategically reduce access to cheap migrant labor in South Africa to create sustainable long-term jobs. Unfortunately, our ethos of Sinubuntu, we have stretched it very far beyond ways that we can control. And cheap labor is a reality in our country, and it has increased exponentially from the times of the apartheid era. So by reducing this, we will be able to create an opportunity of strategic, sustainable long-term job opportunities instead of just entry-level opportunities that are short-lived. Upgrade and expand existing small-scale and limited economic activities in rural areas. And inter alia to that, plan for formal settlements, because we have seen that there is an influx of rural-urban migration. So if we don't have formal settlements prepared, there will be an influx in rural areas if we don't upgrade the small-scale existing and limited economic activities. This also further will improve affordability for the local residents to be able to afford services in these areas instead of our local fears of government providing services without collecting revenue. My last recommendation there is to improve revenue connection through vigorous educational and public participation initiatives. Unfortunately, we are a grant dependent democracy, and that is not sustainable at all. The only way we can improve revenue collection is if people also, apart from building up systems that actually work, is for people, the residents, the community at large, to understand the value of revenue collection and how it integrates with local economic stimulation, so that people can understand that their part is in them doing something and contributing to the local economy and paying for their services. thereby enabling us engineers to actually build more quality and improved services in our rural communities. And from myself, my food for thought is, let us capacitate our nation for holistic, equal economic growth to achieve our common goal to eradicate poverty and build a better South Africa for generations to come in our land. I have a list of references if anybody would like to refer to them. And thank you very much for my time here.
Thank you, Chidiletso, for your insights into municipal service delivery, and also, insights into the legislative framework that supports this, or in some cases, as you've mentioned, does not support it enough. I think you've given us a much better idea of the challenges that exist from the side of the client when it comes to service delivery. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Nima.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you to stop sharing so I can introduce the next speaker.
Nilem?
Yes?
The next speaker is battling to connect, so we can go for Q&A.
Okay, that's great. I am a bit mindful of the time, so maybe we'll take questions from the chat box first, and then I can prompt some after, Godfrey. Would that be okay?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, great. So just looking, and everyone can, post their questions in the chat box or using the Q&A function. Or I think if you want to be promoted and ask live, you can just maybe raise your hand or post in the chat box. Okay, just scrolling through. Godfrey, are you able to see the chat box? I did see some questions a bit earlier, but I can't seem to find them now.
Okay, let's see.
Okay. So I think the first two questions were for Nwabisa, but I think any of our panelists can also chip in if they would like. And it's from Sebo, and it says, what is your take on investing in informal businesses to create equality and economic growth?
Yes, okay, so the informal sector in South Africa is often looked at or considered with a fair amount of suspicion, with reason, because the informal sector is where jobs are most vulnerable and where labor protections and the enforcement of labor protections are the least. However, with unemployment levels in our country pushing 32% the informal sector, because of its low barriers to entry, at least in theory, is an important source of sustainable livelihoods for people. And so I think that when we think about the informal sector, we should see it really as a place of opportunity rather than as a place of needing to regulate it out of existence. So yes, so I definitely do. I see the informal businesses as a very important contributor to and an avenue for sustainable livelihoods for the millions of South Africans that are currently unemployed. I mean, if we compare the role of the informal sector in South Africa to the rest of Africa, I believe that just around 80% of Africa's GDP is contributed by the informal sector. And that situation is quite different in South Africa. Now, that could be an issue of measurement, but it could also be an issue where the structure of our economy penalizes people for seeking opportunity within the informal sector. So yeah, I do definitely think that we should start being innovative in our thinking about how to harness the opportunities that are available in the informal sector.
Okay, thank you, Nwabisa. Does anyone else want to add to that? Chidiletso, maybe.
Okay, thank you very much, Nabisa. But just to add into that in terms of investing, because this is informal and it's difficult to regulate, it's also quite risky to get investment opportunities into them. The best way to do it is to actually collaborate with people you have networked with and you have built credibility with, so that they can assist you without or with minimal lending fees to invest in such a business. So the only way to do it is to utilize your network. That will set you far apart with less debt. So there's a very, very common saying in my home language, Setswana, that says, we are who we are because of others. So go to those networks and tap into them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I hope that answers your question, Tebo. There's another question here that says, South Africa likes mega projects. Would you recommend we focus more on small scale projects that target low income areas, for example, social housing?
Okay, can I take that one?
Yes, yes.
All right. Well, this is legislated because we are supposed to be stimulating the economy where it brings the biggest returns. So it's more bankable to start with the most economic solutions. However, just as Nwabisa has said, if we do not stimulate the local economies in informal businesses and rural areas, we are actually making the gap between the two areas bigger. So we need to legislate a balanced way of accommodating poorer residents into the mix of mega projects. We need to incorporate, there is no problem in doing mega projects, but we as engineers need to come up with sustainable ideas that we can incorporate either through social investment opportunities or plowback projects into the mega projects strategically to bridge that gap.
Thank you for that. I think there is a focus on that, in a lot of these mega projects, a certain amount of the fees set aside for new entrants and, developing smaller businesses. So yeah, there's definitely scope for that as well. The next question says, does EXA offer mentors to those who don't have a mentor in their field or require support? Maybe I can just pose this question to Yolan or Shilpi. I think, Yolan, you also mentioned the importance of getting mentors, both internal and external. What do you suggest is a good way of going about finding a mentor?
Thanks, Anila. Definitely. So if you don't have the opportunity to have a mentor within your organization, EXA, we just need to register with EXA. They would identify a mentor and they will appoint a mentor on, for you. So I think I see someone already sent a link to the EXA website on the chat where you can do that. So I think if they're still battling to find, maybe they can contact someone at either one of us or someone at CISA YPF, and we gladly will help them follow the prompt to get a mentor.
Okay, thank you for that, Yolan. Maybe Shilpi, I can just...
and also I want to say, in terms of, there's the proper EXA mentor for registration, but also in terms of informal mentorship to help you, support you in your career and guide you through your career. There's a lot of value in having good peer mentors, people, friends and people you can depend on. And even when it comes to people you admire in the industry or somebody you've seen, I think you should try and be brave and just ask them, do you want to have a coffee sometime? Do you want to have a 15-minute chat, a half an hour chat? The worst they can do is say no, but you'll be surprised. Many times they'll say yes. Somebody, I think Yolan also mentioned joining these voluntary organizations. That's a wealth of invested, enthusiastic people that can help you along with your career, point you in the right direction, link you up to someone in their organization. So that is the CISAs, the SICs, and all of your other technical ones sometimes also have mentors registered. So reach out as much as you can and be persistent, and you'll find more than you need.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. Just from personal experience, I think more often than not, people are willing to assist. Um, if I can just maybe pose another question, maybe to Yolan again. So, you know, in our industry, we see a gap with regard to diversity of technical experts. And you also mentioned, you know, the brain drain due to limited experts in our industry. Do you have solutions as, you know, or ways that we could possibly address this?
It is quite a difficult one to try and solve all problems. But definitely, as I mentioned, there's a brain drain, meaning that there's less senior people within the industry for us to find as a mentor. As Shilpi and I earlier mentioned, if we can start off within your organization, so we have to potentially knock at multiple doors if we really want to progress in our careers, whether it's an expert field of specialist or whether it's a manager or business owner. So we have to start knocking at multiple doors. And as Shilpi said, you will get more support than you're actually looking for. So I would suggest looking at within your organization as your first stance. Then in parallel to that process, you can get involved in these organizations, the CISAs, the SICs. And through that process, there are a lot of senior people that's willing to mentor. And the last point, which I think it overlaps with the previous question itself, if you don't have any luck in any of these kind of initiatives or avenues, get a hold of someone from CISA, YPF, maybe via the chair, and then we can gladly point you in the right direction. One of the difficulties may be that you can't find a specialist that's doing seismic structural design, and that's something that you want to do, or you want to do pavement design or as I mentioned, another one would be clean rooms in doing HVAC. So sometimes your organization don't have those individuals. So I think reach out, people are willing to help you. And again, it doesn't need to be 20 hours a month or whatever. It could just be 1 hour a month with that mentor, or every second month to meet with them. And then supported by within your organization, you should really have a supervisor or senior that you report to. And generally people in the supervisory role, management role, there's a strong focus on people management. So apart, in my case, as an example, even though I'm a commercial manager for a unit, a strong focus of me is also to ensure that my team under me can trust me, can ask me questions. They can rely on me in terms of giving them guidance. Sometimes I don't have 8 hours in the day to give, but I try my best to at least give an hour or so to just broaden someone's exposure within the industry itself.
Okay, thank you. That was very useful advice. There's another question for Chidiletso. It says, in terms of a network, who do we approach to tap into this market in order to bridge the gap?
Is this the market of informal businesses?
I think so.
Or which market are they? Okay, all right. Look, the network is yours. It's your personal and professional network. It's the relationships that you have built over time. If you don't have enough, come to Young Professional Professionals Forums events. I know those personally to be a getaway card. It's like get out of jail free card for your career. Just come and greet somebody, be nice, be kind, and build up the courage to actually go to the right people, to go to those bosses and those managers, those speakers that have come to the platform, and ask them, do you know somebody who can assist me with this? You know, ask for their number, ask for their email, and do send them an email or contact them, or send them a WhatsApp or an SMS within a day after meeting up with them. Just to greet them and say, can we set up a meeting, just like Yolan said earlier. And it's just about treating them as a friend. How would you treat a stranger that you actually want to meet a friend? So you need to be able to identify them. You need to be able to listen and see the opportunity and actually seize it in terms of your network, because we need a lot of people in different spaces. So it's anybody and everybody that can actually open up a door for you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. I hope that answers your question. Tivian says, as the industry is lacking in mentors, do you think it's a good idea that EXA should offer CPD points to mentors? I ran a pilot mentorship program in KZN, but I've struggled to get committed from registered professionals. If I can just say something and then our panelists can maybe add, but I think that EXA does currently give CPD points if you are a mentor, but I stand to be corrected. Does anyone have any insight on this?
Yeah. EXA definitely does. I'm not sure how much it is, if it's 1 CPD point per year or 5 per year. But if you even think about the mentorship process, while you're mentoring someone, you're growing. So it's a valid professional development sort of CPD. It's a very standard practice. Most professional organizations give CPD for mentoring. Not only are you giving up, you yourself are developing, giving back, you yourself are developing. So it's great that it's done.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of mentors do also mention, that they find the mentoring process to be beneficial to them as well. So I definitely agree with that. Are there any other questions that someone would like to pose? Okay, Tiven says thank you. You can use the Q&A option to ask our panelists anything. Yes?
Maybe a question to Mwabisa in terms of triple BEE. She has suggested it as a tool which can be used to bridge inequality gap. But from that survey, it looks like it has resulted in few Blacks entering the 3,500. It looks like that top is kind of like transformed, but it's not translating to transformation in the middle and the bottom. And also, it's not translating to transformation in terms of the picture which she has shown us of that other township and the golf course. And maybe a question for engineers in the panel also. I mean, how are we going to be able to close inequality gap if we still developing a deep slope which looks similar to what was happening before?
Yeah. Yes. BEE, in its success in reducing inequality, the success of BEE has been limited, and I did mention that because of the limitation in scope of implementation. The first iteration of BEE focused very heavily on the ownership pillar and on incorporating new Black shareholders, or you might even call them Black capitalists into these existing large white-owned corporations, etc. And that era of BEE is the one that has been subject to very significant levels of critique, because, and one of the most significant critiques of it is that it created a very, very narrow and small number of billionaires, but didn't really result in any substantive change in the actual economy. Now, in response to that criticism, policymakers and government re-engineered BEE to make it more broad-based, resulting in the broad-based Black economic empowerment and the codes of good practice that made several more pillars within that important. Some things like enterprise and supply development, employment equity, social development, etc. And that kind of has helped to broaden the scope of transformation that is kind of spurred on by the BEE codes, right? But again, if you think about the implementation of Black economic empowerment, it's important as far as specific companies or businesses are engaging with government. So because of that, it's largely voluntary, and it's important if your procurement relies on, or the people that you yourself sell to, their procurement is heavily reliant on government procurement, right? And so that in itself, right, although is like the businesses that are engaged in activity with government, in procurement, in providing services to government are important. I mean, there's a large section of the South African economy that is not, you know? And as a result, you know, that in itself, the voluntary nature, the market-based nature of the implementation of BEE has meant that its impact is quite narrow, and the impetus for transformation is quite narrow. So I wouldn't throw the entire legislation out completely, because it has, for example, the requirements, for example, for employment equity and laying out specific guidelines for the inclusion of previously disadvantaged individuals, the inclusion of women, things like enterprise and supply development, and mandating the inclusion of small businesses within supply chains and value chains, etc. Those particular elements are important. So I wouldn't really discard that this particular, the BE framework completely, but then I would say if inequality and broader levels of inclusion are our aim, BE has to be part of a much broader policy toolkit that we employ within our economy, right? We need to think much bigger when it comes to that. The BE could never, especially market-based policies like that, could never be adequate in addressing the magnitude of the problem of inequality in South Africa.
Okay, thank you, Nobisa. Definitely agree with what you've said, and I think because it is more something that's voluntary, requires a culture shift, which is more long term and maybe not as easy to achieve. Do any of the other panelists want to add anything on that note, on that question? Yolin?
Thanks, Neelam. I think just to kind of coincide with Kobisa, what she's mentioned, I think a lot of organizations are definitely looking at the broad-based BEE. We try and, I can talk from experience from my organization, my previous employer, and also from some of my friends and colleagues who work for various organizations within the built environment. I think the employment equity is something that's high on agenda in many well-established companies. So they're trying to develop or break the gap in terms of inequality from all levels. Right from the senior management level to middle management, and also grooming young individuals. We have to look at the different races right from the bottom, the gender, male, female, disability, and identify, the only way is to identify this and have them on a progressive growth plan. So it's not just taking a Black individual or female and making them the CEO or manager, but how do we progressively make sure that they can, if you put them out in the industry alone, they'll be able to manage a team or they'll be able to run the business. So it's not about just putting an individual, but make sure that the training and development from school, university, becoming a graduate, identifying a mentor, so that you are growing technically. So if you put you out in the international market, you'll be able to say that, you know, I'm a competent engineer, I'm a competent business owner, and I'm not here because I'm a Black male or Black female, or I'm disabled. But you must be able to be someone competent. So regardless of your color, your gender, I would like for your company or for your to do this work for me as a client. So I think we need to be looking at it holistically. So that individual, then it becomes a repetitive initiative that you train up the next generation. I can give an example from mine. If I go back 4 generations in my family, they were extremely poor, didn't have any kind of luxuries in life. But as we mentioned, in terms of, we persevered, we went to school, we went to high school, universities. It was a long journey to where we are now. So I can definitely tell you that my generation and forward, we're in a better space. So the same must apply to all generations. We need to maybe sponsor a kid at school, primary school, because we build individuals, not just from universities. We often talk, as a parent, they would know that the first 1,000 days of an individual, of a baby, are quite important in terms of building that person. So we need to start growing right from the primary school. It's quite sad to see that a lot of schools and the Department of Health didn't manage to attack the backlog right from the primary school. But a lot of the people with CISA YPF, we go out to the communities and we teach them maths and science, and we understand that there's a big discrepancy from a rural school to an urban school. So we need to start that process right from day one, as Shilpi mentioned, from primary school right up to university. So we all have a responsibility, whether it's in your neighborhood or whether it's outside your neighborhood, to sponsor someone, whether it's financial or time or guidance. And I believe that inequality will happen, or the gap will be closed in the next few years to come. But it's everyone's responsibility and not mine alone, yours alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda. I definitely agree with that. There's a quote that says, as the elevator goes up, you must send it back down again. So I think it's really our responsibility to help those that we can. Do any of the other panelists want to add anything to that? Okay. Thanks. Are there any other questions?
Mila, if time allows, maybe I'm interested in the last question that's actually directed to Shilpi. I would like to hear her response. If time allows, take it.
That's a whole presentation on its own. I wasn't prepared for that, so I think we'll talk about it another time. But there's something in my presentation that I didn't get to present, and I want to just chat about that quickly. Another way young engineers find inequality is through the pay gap, which is pretty real. So sometimes when you're young and you're naive, you get into a job and you're just excited and you're just doing anything, and you don't realize as a woman or as different ethnic groups could also be getting paid less. So that's a really tough one to tackle. And especially when you're grateful for your job and you don't want to really upset people. So I'd be interested to see what some of the other panelists say, but I had a few tips I thought somebody could use. The first is a lot of companies are mandated to have reports on the pay gap, on their gender pay disparities. And sometimes these are corporate tick boxes, especially the large multinationals might have that. And it's worth just talking to your HR and finding out about that. But even if they don't, I think it's really valuable for you to make an appointment with your HR and find out how your salary comes about, and find out more about that and be more visible. Also strategically, you could talk to your manager about things such as promotion and what the next stages in your career are. And this is a hard one, but possibly we need to start being open to our friends and peers about how much we earn. It's hard, it's tough. I hate doing that. And that's the only way we might actually know what others earn. And then there's also the CISA pay scale that you can refer to find out what others earn. So that was just another form of inequality that I didn't have time to mention.
Yeah, thanks. Does anyone else want to add on that issue of inequality when it comes to salaries and remuneration?
Nelem, I've promoted Priska. I think she has a question or comment.
Okay, Priska, you can go ahead and ask your question.
You'll have to unmute.
Hi, Priska.
Hi,
I've got a comment actually on that. Asking your peers thing. I don't know if anybody else has experience with this, but nobody ever wants to talk about their salary. My question is more along the lines, well, not question, but statement in response to that remark. It's more along the lines of, how do you deal with the reactions, obviously, in the office, if ever salaries are discussed, for people who get the yearly bonuses based on their efforts? Especially when you look at those who don't get the opportunity to run their own project. Is it fair that boss A would increase your salary because you had a great year the previous year and would not increase your colleague's salary because they didn't have a great productivity year in comparison to the others?
Okay, who wants to answer this?
I'm not sure if it's correct for annual increases to be linked to productivity, because I mean, cost of life increases whether you're productive or not. But at the same time, it's beneficial for them to do that. You know, maybe it's a way for them to encourage you to be better or look for opportunities. I know it's challenging because some people are earmarked for growth, and not everybody can get into the same space or the same position. I mean, there's only so many levels in a hierarchy, and they get less and less as you go up. But you should have a conversation with your boss about that. It would give you insight into his thinking. And he might even actually have tips for you on how to improve yourself or to stand a better chance. We need to just learn to ask these uncomfortable questions to the people who are doing it, because they are the ones who know why they're doing it. But it's not a fight. It's also a communication. So it's uncomfortable. Presenting it is uncomfortable. How they take it is uncomfortable. So you just need to constantly assure the next person that you want to have this insight for your personal development and improvement, so that you can be a valuable employee, you know. And the perks that come with it are nice, obviously. So yeah, just highlight that mutual benefit and try and get some answers from them.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Priska.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh,
okay.
I just want to also add, yeah, no, I haven't been in that particular situation about, you know, asking friends and bonuses, but when it came for me to ask my friends, I started with my nearest and dearest, very close ones. Well, they asked, I think, and it took me quite a while to finally reveal it. So maybe start with your closest, innermost friends if you do want to ask, and see if they are open. That might be a way to start.
Yeah, the thing is with discussing salaries, you know, when you're new in the industry, you're always reminded that there is a confidentiality clause and you're not supposed to discuss these things. But, you know, in hindsight, we have learned that it's not beneficial to you. But the problem is, if you are going to stir up trouble with that information, the how part of how we use knowledge is the difference between stupidity and wisdom. And unfortunately, not all of us are able to present solutions with information that is beneficial or excluding us from certain things. So even if you get the information, how you actually put it to your advantage is the biggest part of the solution.
Okay, thank you for that. Godfrey, we have someone else who's raised their hand. If you can maybe promote them so they can ask their question. Okay. Have you promoted them, Godfrey?
Neelam, there's Rahel, but unmute.
Sorry, Rahel, you can unmute and ask your question. Okay. I'm not sure if it was maybe just a mistake. Are there any other questions from our attendees? Okay. So the time is now 4:30, so I think we can end today's session. Big thank you to all of our panelists and our speaker for sharing your insights today. I think it was really helpful and gave us a good insight into, the situation regarding inequality in South Africa, in our industry, and also, lots of solutions, possible solutions, and a way forward for us. So I think we can all agree that as engineers, we really have to leverage our professional skills and capacity to have a positive effect towards rectifying the inequalities that exist in society in order for us to improve lives and livelihoods. So it's time for us to mobilize and position ourselves as a leading voice in addressing the inequality that exists in South Africa. So I leave you with a phrase that was coined by the UN for World Engineering Day. And it says, if you want to change the world for the better, become an engineer. Okay, thank you to everyone for joining. And also thank you to our sponsors. Let me just share so we can acknowledge them. Okay, so thank you to MedTech Engineers, Aon, and SKI Civil and Structural Engineers for being our sponsors for the results.